Our reading today comes from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 34, verses 1 through 12. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah across from Jericho. There the Lord showed him the whole land, from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all of the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev and the whole region of the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. Then the Lord said to him, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it." And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He buried him in Moab, in the valley opposite Beth Peor, but to this day no one knows where his grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak nor his strength gone. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days, until the time of weeping and mourning was over. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom, because Moses had laid his hands on him. So the Israelites listened to him and did what the Lord had commanded Moses. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all these signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and all his officials and to his whole land. For no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. May God bless the hearing and the living of this word. And further from the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, portions of Secrets of Heaven. The land of Canaan symbolizes a range of things. It symbolizes the Lord's kingdom, and it symbolizes the church. So it also symbolizes someone in the church. Because it represented the Lord's kingdom, it also represented and symbolized spiritual and heavenly qualities of the Lord's kingdom, and here of the Lord himself. So, my friends, today we come to the end of Moses' journey. The children of Israel are close to the promised land, and we have been journeying with them for a number of weeks. And Moses climbs a mountain in order to get an unimpeded view. He can see the sweep of the entire land before him. And in one sense, this is a sad story. Moses will not get to step foot in the promised land. And this is because of an incident in Numbers 20, a time when God was displeased with Moses and enacted this particular consequence. And in another way, it is a perfect time for a transition in leadership. Joshua has already been designated by the Lord to be Moses' successor, and Moses has commissioned him in the presence of the people, a new leader to take them forth into a new land. It is implied in the text that it was God's own self who buried Moses, a tender and intimate gesture. The people grieved for 30 days, and Moses remains the greatest prophet of the Jewish tradition. And so we've been following the Israelites on their journey toward the promised lands for 6 weeks now. And this seems like a good time to talk a little bit about the promised land and what it represents in the Swedenborgian worldview. For Swedenborg, all things in the Bible represent an aspect of our own interior spiritual landscape. And these representations have levels of meaning, levels that through their connected significance work to bind us to each other, to heaven, and ultimately to God. And so therefore, most things in the Bible will have multiple internal meanings. a personal or individual meaning, a communal meaning, a heavenly or spiritual meaning, and then finally, a meaning relating to God's own self. And so it is with the notion of land, and specifically the promised land. The Israelites spent a long time heading towards that land that was promised to them, a holy land, a land of milk and honey. And when we think about what land means to us, well, there might be several things that come to mind. Land is something we walk on, something that we enter into, something that has boundaries, that gives shape and form to our journeys, that connects us with our ancestors, a place where we might make a home, a place that might inform our character, a space we inhabit as we live our lives. And Moses climbed the mountain, and the Lord showed him the whole land and said, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will give it to your descendants, and I have let you see it with your own eyes." The land is then both a promise and a destination. And it is in this metaphorical and poetic yet concrete sense that Swedenborg talks about all the different things that the promised land means in these stories. In a personal way, the promised land represents the potential of our spiritual journey, the mature internal space to which we are all heading, our angelic shape that is revealed to us through the process of spiritual growth. In a communal way, the land represents the earthly communities we all seek that shape and guide our journeys, support our growth. And in that communal way, but concretely, it can mean a church or whatever kind of spiritual community in which we gather. But in more mystical terms, it means the Lord's kingdom, the embodiment of justice and love in all human community in the world. And the meanings continue. On a spiritual level, the promised land represents heaven, the ultimate formative community, the force that shapes us into angels, the destination of all of our souls, the place where we will find active and peaceful belonging. And finally, in an ultimate way, the land represents the Lord, the elemental love and wisdom that we are all heading towards, from whom all these subsequent levels flow, and not just in a top-down way, but as a loving, vibrant pulse of life from the inside. And this multi-level promise and opportunity of the promised land is the way that God shows up for us, the divine intentionality and vision that God has for us and our lives. The journey that the children of Israel have taken in these past weeks represent aspects of our ongoing journey in relationship to God's vision, a path away from that which enslaves our thinking and our feeling, and towards the promise of the land, a spiritually mature selfhood, beloved and just earthly community, supportive heavenly community, and a resilient connection to our God. But I found one little addition to all of this talk about land that seems to take these ideas even further. Swedenborg mentions that the inner meaning of land is different to that of ground. The land is the community or the spiritually mature person who is yet to exist. It's what we're working towards. While the ground represents when that reality comes into being. And that really resonates for me. When we see the land, when we think of the land or even our land, we think of it in a broad sweep, like on top of that mountain. But the ground is something we touch and interact with. We put our hands on the ground, we work the ground. When we speak of someone who is in touch with their own life and selfhood, we call them grounded. If we are going to live our lives in the promised land, if we want to inhabit that land, really inhabit, the generative opportunities that God is giving us as part of that promise, then we have to pay attention to the ground, to the everyday details and relationships and structures of our lives, to the ground of our